Hello Scouts and welcome to Scouting at Home. For today's activity we're going to be doing some more Scout pioneering construction. We'll be building on what we learnt in our previous video using A-frames and tripods to build larger structures. You will find an activity sheet attached with some instructions, but stay with us as we walk through it step by step. Good luck and good scouting. For this next project we're going to need a tripod that we built in our basic pioneering structures activity. As you will see, we've put the brace on one side further up the A-frame on one side while the other two sit at the base. This creates a nice level, and we're going to need a second one of those. So exactly the same. If you haven't done the pioneering basic constructions, it's time to go and have a look at that now because you will need those basic skills in building tripods. You'll also need 4 extra sticks, dowels or pencils and some spare rubber bands as well. To turn our 2 tripods into a table, we're going to start with putting a dowel lengthways between our 2 higher braces on either side. And we're going to fix those in place using a rubber band in the style of a square lashing attaching to our brace across here. So let me just start with that one. As we've said in our previous videos, we'll be using a square lashing here. But since we're using rubber bands, we'll be tying it in the fashion of the Japanese square lashing. It is very important with this particular activity to make sure that our brace here is the same height on both tripods. So do try and make sure that your tripods are built with the same length of material and that you've checked them against each other to ensure that they're uniform. Oops. Can be a little bit tricky with a rubber band, or just as tricky with twine, to be honest. If you haven't had a go at tying knots with twine, give it a go. It is a little bit trickier than tying it with full-size rope because your fingers are very big compared to it. But rubber bands make a good quick alternative when we're putting together demonstration models like this, as it allows us to put together a model very, very quickly with just one person rather than having a whole team like we would when we're doing pioneering at Scouts. Now the benefit of doing a model like this is of course that when you want to plan a project to do with your patrol or with your troop, it allows you to not only work out the practicalities of how you would build your structure, but also what materials you might need, because drawing it on a piece of paper won't necessarily tell you how those materials are going to behave with each other when you go to actually build it, whether they'll be rigid enough or whether they'll provide enough stability for what you had in mind. There we are. Now coming to our last square lashing here. Just get that over the end there. Can be a little bit tricky as we get to our last one because of course everything else is in place, which gives us less room to move. But there we are, it's coming together pretty well. Now for our next step we're going to actually be creating a bit of a tabletop. Now there's a number of ways you could do this. Of course you may have an actual tabletop at your scout hall which you could place across the structure. And for this model I have here a little piece of balsa wood that I could use to simulate that. But equally we could use such things as paddle pop sticks, which is what I'm going to use today. So I've got a series of paddle pop sticks that we'll place across the top here. And all we're going to do is we're using a piece of string to weave those into position. So I'll start with a clove hitch at one end of my cross rail here. And I'm just going to go over and then pull a bight up from the inside and feed my next paling into there and then go over the next one and repeat that process the whole way along. Now don't pull too tight as you go because they'll have a tendency to want to flip out of the way as you're pulling. As you can see there, as I pull a little bit tight it starts to flip. Once you have it tied on both sides, it'll be much more secure, but initially you just need to have it as firm, but not too tight. and we can push those along, as you can see. Make sure there's plenty of room to give us a nice solid tabletop. Now if you were doing this as a pioneering project, of course you may not have flat pieces of timber to work with. You may be using round pieces of timber, and the same process works exactly the same. In fact, if we had some round timber, I could demonstrate. But it's very quick. There's no need to tie each one individually one by one. They'll be just as stable once this is done as if you had tied each one of them clove hitched and square lashinged in position one at a time. And you can see there's a lot less rope to interfere with whatever you want to put on top of your table as well. So it is beneficial in that sense also. The last one gets a bit tricky, big fingers. There we are. Now it's at this time that you would normally tie that off, but I'm going to do the other side first before I tie it off, so that I can make sure they're both nice and tight. So again, starting with a clove hitch, which I need to fit into this little gap here. And if you're not sure how to do a clove hitch, we did cover that in our previous Basic Pioneering Knots 1 video, where we also covered the square lashings that we use on the cross members. And again, over and under. This one's a little bit trickier, of course, because now we've got the paling in the way. We need to push the paling up and flick that over the top. And go over the top and push the paling up and flick that little bite over the top. Now, because this is the second time we're going along and the previous side is holding the palings down, you can be a lot tighter on this side, which means that you won't need to adjust it as much at the end, because the other side won't flick as much as it had when we were pulling tight on the other side. Nearly there. Last one. Now remember, that last one isn't tied down on the end there either, so it's just sort of holding in position at the moment. So do take care if you're building this in real size like this, because that will have a tendency to flip. Now we can make them nice and tight on both sides, and to get the tension along, just like tying your shoelaces, just work your way from the beginning along, pulling a little bit tight on the loops until you work your way all the way to the end, and we can pull that tail tight. Now to finish off, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to tie off onto my cross rail here, just because it's easy to get to. And it allows me to not only tension downwards, but also tension crossways from where we started. And that's going to give us a little bit more stability in our bench. With a half hitch, and a second half hitch. If you find it difficult, sometimes using a pencil or something like that to push it through is helpful. And that's one side done. And the same thing on the other side. Again, we can pull it tight like a set of laces, working our way from one end to the other. And you can even just push up a little bit as you go, which makes it nice and tight. And I'm going to tie off with a half hitch. One half hitch and a second half hitch. Now because this is a model, I'm just going to trim off my excess string there to make it look prettier. But of course, if we were using real ropes, we'd just bundle it up nice and neat. So that's our bench done. But if I was you and I was on a scout camp, this would be perfect for our kitchen. But if we want to sit and eat at this, of course we'll need something to sit on, which is what our extra rails are for. We're going to affix those on the side here, again using a square lashing, and that's going to give us a little bit of a bench seat. There are fancier ways we could do this. In fact, if you wanted to put your first bar this way across underneath, it would give you some space to put a number of bars across this way, giving you a wider seat. But just as a basic, quick way to get some seats there for everyone to sit down and enjoy their dinner, we're just going to put a single bar on either side, which is surprisingly comfortable. If you haven't already done that on a scout camp, I suggest that you give yourself a go of building a full camp kitchen. rather than just using a folding table you brought from home. It's a great opportunity to practice your skills, and it'll also be very impressive if you're going on a big camp where you want to show off to the judges what a brilliant campsite you've got, if you can build a table from scratch. There we are. Now, we do get asked a lot about what sort of materials you should use to do pioneering construction, and honestly the best materials you can get are natural trees. Nice and straight. If you speak to someone who has some property, some bushland that they have available to them where they might have some trees that you can cut down, often scout campsites do this. Another great thing in Australia particularly is that where we have high power cables running overhead, the trees need to be trimmed anyway, so there's often the opportunity to go in and help trim the trees rather than letting the power company do it, and that way you can choose the best and straightest trees to take home with you for Scout pioneering spas. Where we are in Brisbane, we're very fortunate to have a number of campsites that the Scouts own, which include high voltage power lines running overhead, which means that there are plenty of trees that need to be trimmed from time to time. So have a chat to your campsite managers and they can identify the areas where you are able to cut trees, or as I said, private property owners may have trees available also. So there we have it. That is our camp table, complete with seats on the sides and a paling top bench, allowing us to sit and enjoy our camp dinner together. Very simple construction, but very, very impressive if your patrol can get in and build one for your next camp. In this activity, we're going to make a bridge. For that, you're going to need the A-frames that we made in our basic pioneering construction, some rubber bands, a couple of short dowels or pencils or sticks, some string, some paddle pop sticks, and a piece of cardboard or wood or something like that that we can peg it down to with some dressmaker's pins. So to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to attach the two short dowels to the top of our Scout chariot, and we're going to do that using a square lashing. Now I'm going to be using rubber bands, but you could also use string for this part also. Now because I'm using a rubber band, it will be tied like a square lashing in the Japanese style. There we are, just like that. Now, as we mentioned previously, you're going to need to have two A-frames to make a bridge, and for that you're going to make sure that they're the same size and shape as each other to make sure these are at the same height. Just going to push that down a little bit. It's not essential, but it certainly helps. And these are going to form the two trusses at either end of our bridge. Now, as I said, we can use a piece of cardboard to help hold our bridge up, and to do that we would simply use some safety pins at either side that we can attach our string to. So I would just use a clove hitch to attach it to the pin at either end. If we were doing this in true size, we would of course use different knots. But in this particular case, we're just going to be building a model to demonstrate the structure of how we would build our final bridge. Now, I'm going to attach a clove hitch onto the cross section here. And to do that, I'm just going to do a little mouse ears style clove hitch like we covered in our previous video. And we need to make sure that it is tied on top of our bridge, so that the clove hitch is pulling down across on top. If it's on the underside, that knot is not as strong. A clove hitch at the other end. And again, we're going to pin that down at the end here and finish off with a clove hitch. Important that we get the tension right just now, because this is what's going to be holding our bridge up. go, perfect. And you can see there's just a little bit of tension, but it's enough to keep these steady, but obviously twice as many is going to keep it much steadier. So we're going to do the same thing on the other side with another piece of string. Again, starting with a clove hitch. And then another clove hitch on top here. Do it the right way around would help. There we are. Now, to get the tension even on these, I can just rock the knot back and forth until I'm happy that they're evenly taut. And on this one here, I'm going to actually wrap the knot around and do the full clove hitch, because that allows me to position the distance here a little bit better. And then just flick that around for another half hitch. Now the advantage of using cardboard as opposed to just putting this onto a flat piece of paper or something like that is that we can actually push the feet of the A-frames into the cardboard a little bit like we would into the dirt to stop them slipping around too much. And again, I'm just going to rock those until I'm happy that the tension is even. A bit too much perhaps, there we are. Now we're going to tie another clove hitch down the other end here. If we were doing this for real, of course, we would be using a block and tackle to tension these up, and then most likely securing them so that we could remove the block and tackle. You could also be using a rolling hitch or a truckies hitch, depending on the size of the structure. So they're pretty rigid now, they're standing pretty straight and tall. The next step that we need to do is we're going to build our decking to walk across. For that, we're going to use a series of paddle pop sticks, but equally you could lay a series of bars across, or spars rather, across the entire length here as well. But I'm going to make a little decking out of paddle pop sticks, and again using some string. Might use some fresh string actually. And we want to make sure that we've got enough slack there to tie off to our anchor, and then we're going to tie a clove hitch to each of our planks. And because of the way the planks are going to be loaded when we stand on them, we actually want the clove hitch to be on the bottom of the plank. So bear with me as we do this bit. We might even just speed it up to make it a little bit more interesting. And there we have it, there's our boarding all done, clove hitches all the way along. And what we're going to do is we're going to place that in between our two frames so that the tails run over the top of our lower brace there. And then that will be tied back to our anchor also. So again, I'm just using clove hitches, and I'm going to start by making it relatively tight at this end so that I can pull it down towards the other end to get it to essentially float above the ground as it would over the stream or ravine that we were building our bridge. There we are. Again, just clove hitching at this end again. Now of course that's not a complete bridge, is it? Because this is going to move an awful lot if we try and cross that. So what we'll actually use is some extra string to create a handrail either side. We'll start with a clove hitch at this end. And we'll finish with a clove hitch at the other end as well. Now what we also want to do is we want to have support that runs along between our handrail and our decking. And to do that we'll start with another clove hitch. And now all we're going to do is create a little twist and put it around our decking, over the top of our handrail, create a little twist over our decking, and so on and repeat along the entire length. Now, if we were doing this in a full scale, we would want to put an actual clove hitch onto the decking, but because we're just demonstrating here, we're doing this mainly as decoration. We're just going to make it nice and easy and quick on ourselves. Now you don't have to do it under every single board, but it does certainly look very nice. Although it does use a lot of string, as you can see. I'll have to tie a little bit extra string onto here. And there we have it. We've completed our suspension bridge, complete with decking, handrails, and all secured to our pegs at either end. And there it is.